My name is Charlotte and I'm 28 years old. Just 2 years ago, I thought I had the perfect American family until they proved me wrong in the most devastating way imaginable. Right now, I'm sitting in paradise, literally in the Maldives, watching the sunset over crystal blue waters, while my family back home is dealing with the consequences of stealing my $30,000 wedding and my entire inheritance. They thought they were so clever, but one letter from this tropical paradise exposed everything and brought their whole world crashing down. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal and justice, I want to know where you're watching from. Are you Team Charlotte? Or do you think family should always come first? Hit that like button if you believe actions have consequences, and don't forget to subscribe because you're about to hear how one letter changed everything. Trust me, this gets wild. Growing up in Ohio, I always believed family meant everything. My parents, Gerald and Marlene, built a successful construction business from nothing, working 16-hour days to give my brother Wayne and me every opportunity. But from the moment Wayne could walk, it was clear he was the golden child. Star quarterback in high school, straight A, student, full scholarship to Ohio State. Meanwhile, I had to fight for every bit of recognition, every proud smile, every acknowledgement that I even existed. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't bitter about Wayne's success. I was proud of my little brother. I worked my way through college, graduated with honors, and landed a great job as a marketing manager at a growing firm in Columbus. By 26, I was making good money, had my own apartment, and felt like I was finally proving myself to my family. That's when I met Marcus at a work conference. He was an architect with the gentlest hands and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours over coffee that had gone cold long ago. He didn't care that I wasn't the golden child in my family. To him, I was everything that mattered. Marcus proposed after 2 years of the most genuine, loving relationship I'd ever experienced. We were at our favorite lakeside restaurant where we'd had our first official date. He got down on one knee right as the sun was setting, and I swear every person in that restaurant started crying when I said yes. Even the waitress brought us free champagne. Planning our wedding became my passion project. I'd dreamed of this day since I was little, and Marcus was happy to let me handle most of the details while he focused on finding us the perfect house to start our life together. We chose the historic Riverside Manor, this gorgeous ballroom with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. My dress was everything I'd ever imagined. Ivory silk with intricate beadwork that caught the light when I moved. The seamstress said I looked like a princess, and for the first time in my life I felt like one. We picked white roses and baby's breath for the flowers, hired a photographer whose portfolio made me cry, and found a caterer who specialized in farm-to-table cuisine that would make our guests feel like they were dining at the finest restaurant. Every detail was perfect because Marcus and I saved for 18 months to make it happen. $30,000 might not sound like much to some people, but to us, it represented sacrifice and planning and dreams coming true. We skipped vacations, ate dinner at home, instead of going out and watched every penny to make our wedding day everything we wanted it to be. My grandmother Esther was my biggest supporter through all of this. She was my dad's mother, and while everyone else seemed to orbit around Wayne's achievements, Grandma Esther always made time for me. She'd call me every Sunday just to chat, remembered every promotion at work, and genuinely celebrated my engagement like I was the first person in the world to ever get married. Grandma Esther owned several rental properties around town, investments she'd made over the years with my grandfather before he passed. She'd always told me privately that as the responsible granddaughter, the one who visited regularly and actually cared about her life, I would inherit everything when she was gone. It wasn't something we talked about often, but she'd mention it every few months, usually, when Wayne hadn't called her in weeks. I never questioned this arrangement. Why would I? Grandma Esther had been saying it for years, and Wayne was already the golden child who got everything else. It seemed fair that I would finally get something that was meant for me. The wedding planning kicked into high gear that spring. My future sister-in-law Beverly threw me the most beautiful bridal shower with all my college friends and co-workers. Marcus's bachelor party was a weekend fishing trip with his college buddies, while my bachelorette party was a wine-tasting tour that ended with all of us crying happy tears about how perfect Marcus and I were together. Marcus's family welcomed me with open arms from day one. His mother Janet treated me like the daughter she never had, and his father Paul would joke that Marcus better not mess this up because they were keeping me either way. It felt incredible to be part of a family that actually wanted me there, that celebrated my presence instead of tolerating it. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Our venue was booked, our vendors were confirmed, and our guest list was finalized. Marcus had found us a beautiful starter home just outside Columbus, and we were planning to move in right after our honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains. Life felt like it was finally rewarding me for all those years of being the responsible daughter who never caused any trouble. But 2 weeks before our wedding day, things started feeling off in ways I couldn't quite explain. My mother Marlene began making strange comments about changes to our plans, asking detailed questions about vendor payments that seemed oddly intrusive. She'd call me at work, wanting to know if the florist had been paid, if the photographer had confirmed his schedule, if the caterer needed any additional information. At first, I thought she was just being helpful. Maybe she wanted to make sure everything went smoothly for her daughter's big day, but her interest felt different somehow, more calculating than caring. She'd ask about specific dollar amounts, payment schedules, and contract details that seemed beyond normal motherly concern. Wayne's behavior was even more puzzling. My brother, who usually showed about as much interest in my life as he did in watching paint dry, suddenly wanted to know everything about our wedding plans. He'd drop by my apartment unannounced, asking to see our vendor contracts, wanting details about the venue layout, and inquiring about our timeline for the day. When I asked why he was so interested, Wayne would just shrug and say he wanted to make sure his big sister had the perfect wedding. Coming from someone who forgot my birthday 3 years running, this sudden brotherly concern felt suspicious. The weirdest part was discovering that my parents had been contacting our vendors directly. Our florist, Mrs. Rodriguez, mentioned during a final consultation that Charlotte's mother had called to discuss modifying the flower arrangements. She seemed confused when I told her I hadn't authorized any changes and that my mother should have spoken to me first. Our photographer David said something similar. Apparently, the family had requested changes to our shooting schedule, wanting to accommodate additional photos that I'd never discussed. When I called David to clarify, he seemed genuinely puzzled, saying he thought the requests had come from me through my family. Each time I tried to get to the bottom of these mysterious vendor contacts, I hit a wall of confusion. The vendors were apologetic, but insisted they were just following what they thought were my wishes, communicated through family members. Nobody seemed to be lying exactly, but something wasn't adding up. My grandmother Esther became increasingly difficult to reach during this same period. Every time I called to invite her to a wedding-related event, or just to chat, my mother had some excuse for why Grandma Esther was too tired for visitors not feeling well, or already had plans. This was completely unlike my grandmother, who always made time for me. The few times I did manage to see Grandma Esther, she seemed different, more fragile, more confused, less like the sharp, witty woman who had been my champion for so many years. She mentioned that Wayne had been visiting her frequently, which shocked me because Wayne had never shown much interest in spending time with our grandmother before. When I asked Wayne about these visits, he became defensive, saying he was just trying to be a better grandson and that I shouldn't be jealous of his relationship with Grandma Esther. His response felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this question. Marcus started noticing how stressed I was becoming. I wasn't sleeping well, I was snapping at him over little things, and I couldn't seem to enjoy what should have been the happiest time of our lives. He suggested maybe we should postpone the wedding if my family was causing this much anxiety, but I refused to let them ruin the day we'd worked so hard to plan. I confided in my best friend Jennifer about the strange family dynamics, but she suggested it was probably just typical pre-wedding stress. Families get weird around big events, she said. Everyone wants to feel involved and important. I wanted to believe her, but my gut kept telling me something more serious was happening. The final week before our wedding, even my dress fittings became complicated. The seamstress, Mrs. Chen, mentioned that someone claiming to be my sister had called about emergency alterations. When I told her I don't have a sister, she became visibly uncomfortable, saying there had been some confusion about measurements and timing that she didn't fully understand. My wedding day started wrong and only got worse from there. I woke up in the bridal suite at the historic Riverside Inn, where Marcus and I had booked rooms for our wedding party, only to discover that my key card had been deactivated sometime during the night. When I tried to get back into my own room after grabbing coffee from the lobby, the door wouldn't open. The hotel staff seemed genuinely confused by the situation. The desk clerk, a sweet, elderly woman named Dorothy, kept apologizing and saying there had been some kind of family emergency that required room changes. She showed me paperwork that authorized the changes, but the signature wasn't mine. When I insisted I'd never signed anything or authorized any changes, Dorothy became flustered and called her manager. It took 45 minutes to get back into my bridal suite, precious time I needed for hair and makeup. My wedding party was already confused and running behind schedule. My maid of honor, Jennifer, kept asking what was happening, but I had no answers that made any sense. When we finally arrived at the Riverside Manor, my heart stopped. Nothing looked like what I had planned. Instead of the elegant white roses and gold accents that Marcus and I had chosen, the entire venue was decorated in purple and silver. Cheap purple tablecloths covered the tables I'd specifically requested in ivory, and silver balloons bobbed from chairs where I'd planned delicate floral arrangements. Mrs. Rodriguez, our florist, was near tears when she saw my reaction. She explained that Charlotte's mother had called 3 days earlier insisting on these changes, showing her a signed authorization form that looked official. Mrs. Rodriguez had tried to call me to confirm, but someone identifying themselves as my wedding planner had assured her the changes were exactly what the bride wanted. The catering situation was even worse. Instead of the elegant farm-to-table menu that Marcus and I had carefully selected and paid extra for folding tables along the wall, held aluminum trays of basic comfort food. Mac and cheese fried chicken, mashed potatoes and green beans that looked like they came from the cheapest possible catering service. Our caterer James was nowhere to be found. In his place stood a woman I'd never seen before who introduced herself as the replacement caterer, saying there had been a family emergency and menu changes that were requested by the bride's family just days before the wedding. She had a contract with my mother's signature on it, authorizing the complete menu change. But the biggest shock was yet to come. As I stood in the venue lobby, trying to process the disaster unfolding around me, I saw Wayne walking toward me in a black tuxedo, holding hands with his longtime girlfriend Sandra, who was wearing a white wedding dress. Wayne smiled like nothing was wrong and announced that surprise he and Sandra were also getting married today. Wasn't it wonderful that we could share this special day and save the family money by having a double ceremony? The officiant had been told this was always the plan, and Wayne seemed genuinely confused that I might be upset about this development. Sandra, who I'd always gotten along with reasonably well, looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up. She kept glancing between Wayne and me like she was waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Later, I would learn that Wayne had told her I was enthusiastic about sharing our wedding day. My carefully chosen photographer David was nowhere to be found. Instead, a different photographer introduced himself as the replacement, saying he'd been hired by the bride's family for a more casual, family-friendly celebration. He had no idea about the specific shots Marcus and I had planned, the timeline we'd established, or the style we'd requested. The final insult came when I went to change into my wedding dress. The ivory silk gown with intricate beadwork that I'd dreamed about for months had a large dark stain across the front that definitely hadn't been there during my final fitting. One of my bridesmaids, cousin Lisa, apologetically explained that there had been an accident with coffee that morning, but it seemed suspicious that such a careful, devastating stain could happen by coincidence. A replacement dress was offered, a simple off-the-rack gown that fit poorly and looked nothing like what I'd chosen. It was the kind of dress you might buy for a courthouse wedding, not the fairy tale ceremony I'd planned and saved for. Marcus's family was horrified by the chaos unfolding around us. His mother Janet pulled me aside and quietly offered to postpone everything. "We could leave right now," she said, "and have the wedding we actually wanted at a later date." But looking at all our guests who had travelled to be there, thinking about all the money that was already spent, I felt trapped. I went through with the ceremony, but it was like watching someone else's nightmare version of my wedding day. The double ceremony meant everything took twice as long. Our carefully planned timeline was destroyed. The officiant kept mixing up our names and vows. Wayne and Sandra went first, so by the time Marcus and I said our vows, it felt like an afterthought. The reception was a disaster that perfectly matched the ceremony. My carefully chosen menu was replaced with cheap buffet food that ran out before half the guests had eaten. The wedding cake I'd designed, a 3-tier masterpiece with sugar flowers that matched my bouquet, had been replaced with a simple sheet cake from a grocery store with both couples' names written in basic frosting. Even our first dance was ruined. Marcus and I had chosen a song that meant something special to us, but halfway through the DJ announced that the other couple wanted their moment too. Wayne and Sandra joined us on the dance floor, turning our intimate first dance into an awkward double date. I smiled through it all because I didn't know what else to do. Our guests looked confused and uncomfortable. Marcus's family was clearly appalled but trying to be polite. My own family acted like everything was perfectly normal, like hijacking someone's wedding was just good, practical planning. 3 weeks after what should have been the happiest day of my life, I got a phone call that made everything infinitely worse. My grandmother Esther had died quietly in her sleep, and nobody had bothered to call me until after the funeral arrangements were already made. I was devastated that I hadn't been there for her final days, that I hadn't had a chance to say goodbye to the one family member who had always been in my corner. When I asked my mother why nobody called me immediately, she said they didn't want to worry me while I was still adjusting to married life. The funeral was a blur of guilt and grief. I kept thinking about all the times in recent months when I'd tried to visit Grandma Esther, but was told she wasn't up for company. Had she been asking for me? Did she wonder why I stopped coming around? The thought that she might have felt abandoned by me during her final weeks was almost unbearable. But what I noticed most at the funeral was Wayne's confident demeanour. He wasn't just grieving, he was acting like someone who had important business to handle. He spoke with the funeral director about payments and arrangements with an authority that seemed strange for a grandson who had barely visited before the last few months. My parents were acting odd too, exchanging meaningful looks with Wayne and having whispered conversations that stopped whenever I got close. There was an energy in the room that I couldn't identify, like everyone knew something I didn't. The will reading was scheduled for the following week at the office of Grandma Esther's longtime lawyer, Mr. Peterson. I assumed it would be a formality. Grandma Esther had been telling me for years that I would inherit her rental properties and savings. It was supposed to be my security, my foundation for the future. Marcus and I were building together. Walking into that lawyer's office, I still believed I was there to learn about my inheritance. Mr. Peterson, a kind man in his 70s, who had handled Grandma Esther's affairs for decades, looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through papers and avoided making eye contact with me too. The will reading revealed the most devastating betrayal I could have imagined. Everything, absolutely everything, had been left to Wayne. The 4 rental properties worth approximately $400,000, her savings accounts totaling nearly $200,000 more, even personal items like her jewelry and furniture that I thought were meant for me. All of it went to my brother. Mr. Peterson mentioned that Grandma Esther had changed her will 6 months earlier, during a period that I now realised coincided with Wayne's sudden, frequent visits. The new will included specific language about Wayne being the more responsible choice for managing rental properties and making sound financial decisions. I sat in that lawyer's office feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. $600,000 that I'd been promised my entire life gone to the golden child who already got everything else. But worse than the money was the betrayal of trust, the realization that even my grandmother, the one person I thought truly valued me, had been turned against me. After the reading, I confronted my family in the parking lot. I was crying and angry and completely devastated, demanding to know how this had happened. That's when Wayne dropped the bombshell that shattered what was left of my faith in my family. He'd spent months visiting Grandma Esther, he explained with a smug smile that I'd never seen before. During those visits, he'd carefully convinced our sick elderly grandmother that I was irresponsible with money and wouldn't appreciate the inheritance she'd worked so hard to build. Wayne showed me documents where Grandma Esther had questioned my ability to manage rental properties, referencing my expensive wedding planning and frivolous spending habits. Reading her words, clearly influenced by Wayne's manipulation, felt like being stabbed in the heart by someone I'd loved and trusted completely. My mother Marlene finally admitted her role in this betrayal. She had provided Wayne with detailed information about my wedding expenses, helping him paint a picture of financial irresponsibility that convinced Grandma Esther to change her will. Every question about vendor payments, every inquiry about our budget, had been ammunition for Wayne's campaign against me. They claimed they were protecting the family assets, and that Wayne needed the money more because Sandra was pregnant, as if stealing from me was somehow an act of family love, rather than pure greed and cruelty. My father Gerald stayed silent through this entire confrontation, but his silence was complicity. He had watched his son manipulate his own dying mother and said nothing. He had watched his wife help orchestrate the betrayal of his daughter and done nothing to stop it. But the financial betrayal went even deeper than the inheritance. I discovered that my wedding vendor payments, the $30,000 Marcus and I had saved over 18 months, had been somehow redirected to pay for Wayne and Sandra's portion of our double wedding disaster. It turned out that my parents had access to my bank account through an old joint account from my college years that I'd forgotten to close. Technically, what they did was legal since my name was still on the account with theirs, but morally it was theft of the money Marcus and I had sacrificed and saved to make our wedding dreams come true. The months following the inheritance betrayal were the darkest period of my life. My marriage to Marcus was suffering under the weight of my obsession with proving that Wayne had manipulated our dying grandmother. The legal fees alone for investigating potential undue influence were more than we could afford, and multiple lawyers told me that proving manipulation of an elderly person would be nearly impossible without witnesses or recordings. I became consumed with researching Wayne's activities during those months when he was visiting Grandma Esther. I spent hours online looking up laws about elder abuse and inheritance fraud, hoping to find some legal avenue for challenging the will. But every path seemed to lead to the same conclusion: Wayne had been careful to stay within legal boundaries, while completely destroying my relationship with my grandmother. My relationship with my parents completely deteriorated during this time. They claimed I was being dramatic and that I should be happy for Wayne's success instead of dwelling on family decisions that were out of my control. According to them, I was the problem for not accepting that life isn't always fair. Marcus tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain my obsession was putting on our new marriage. He'd married a happy, optimistic woman and suddenly found himself living with someone who could talk about nothing but family betrayal and legal strategies for getting revenge. We were fighting more, connecting less, and I was afraid I might lose the one good thing that had come out of this nightmare. 6 months after the inheritance theft, Marcus suggested we take a trip to reconnect and try to heal from the trauma my family had inflicted on both of us. We couldn't afford anything extravagant after the legal fees and wedding disaster, but Marcus had been saving a small amount from each paycheck for months, hoping to surprise me with a vacation that might help us get back to being happy together. Using our modest savings, we booked a week at a simple resort in the Maldives, something I'd dreamed about since seeing pictures in travel magazines, but never imagined I could afford. Marcus said we needed to get as far away from Ohio and my toxic family as possible, somewhere beautiful enough to remind me that there was still good in the world. The flight to the Maldives was the first time in months that I felt truly relaxed. Something about being 30,000 feet above the ocean, flying toward a tropical paradise, made my family's betrayal feel smaller and more manageable. Marcus held my hand during takeoff and told me this was our chance to remember why we fell in love and start fresh. Our resort wasn't the most luxurious place in the Maldives, but to me it looked like heaven on earth. Clear blue water, white sand beaches, and little bungalows on stilts that looked like something from a dream. For the first time since the wedding disaster, I felt genuinely happy and hopeful about the future. On our first evening, as we watched the sunset from our beachside table, Marcus made me promise that we wouldn't spend our entire vacation talking about my family. This week was about us, about healing, about remembering that we had each other, and that was enough to build a good life together. But on our second day, while Marcus was snorkeling and I was reading by the pool, I overheard a conversation between American tourists at the next table that changed everything. They were discussing estate planning and family business management, and something about their conversation sparked an idea that would eventually bring justice to my situation. While Marcus enjoyed the resort activities, I found myself spending hours in the business center using the internet to research property management and inheritance law with a focus I hadn't felt since college. Instead of looking for ways to challenge Wayne's inheritance, I started investigating what he was actually doing with the properties and money he'd stolen from me. What I discovered was even more satisfying than I'd hoped. Wayne, despite his confidence about deserving the inheritance, had no idea how to manage rental properties responsibly. Online reviews from his tenants painted a picture of a negligent landlord who ignored maintenance requests, raised rents illegally, and failed to address serious safety concerns. The city's public records showed a growing list of code violations at properties Wayne now owned. Broken furnaces in winter, leaking roofs that weren't repaired, electrical problems that posed fire hazards. Tenants were complaining to the city about living conditions, but Wayne seemed oblivious to the legal requirements of being a landlord. More interesting was what I found on social media. Sandra posted constantly about their expensive lifestyle funded by Grandma Esther's inheritance. Designer handbags, luxury vacations, a huge new house with a 3-car garage, and home renovations that cost more than most people make in a year. They were burning through money like it was unlimited. Meanwhile, Wayne's rental properties were deteriorating because he was spending the rental income on personal luxuries instead of reinvesting in property maintenance and improvements. He was treating his inheritance like lottery winnings instead of a business that required ongoing investment and responsible management. I started documenting everything I could find. Screenshots of tenant complaints posted online, photos of properties from Google Street View that showed obvious maintenance problems, records of unpaid city fines and tax delinquencies that were piling up because Wayne couldn't be bothered with the administrative side of property ownership. The more I researched, the more I realized that Wayne's inexperience and irresponsibility were creating vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with my desire for revenge. He was simply failing as a property manager and businessman, creating legal and financial problems through his own incompetence. Marcus initially worried that I was falling back into my obsession with family drama, but as I showed him evidence of Wayne's failures, he began to understand that this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice and accountability for someone who had stolen an inheritance he wasn't qualified to handle. I began reaching out anonymously to Wayne's tenants, posing as someone interested in renting in the area and asking about their experiences with their current landlord. The stories I heard were heartbreaking and infuriating. Elderly tenants living without heat in winter because Wayne wouldn't fix their furnaces. Young families dealing with mold and water damage that Wayne ignored for months. Through these conversations, I learned that Wayne had been lying to our parents about his success as a property manager. He'd told them the rental business was thriving and that he was making improvements to all the properties. In reality, he was neglecting his responsibilities while living off the cash reserves Grandma Esther had saved over decades. I also discovered that Wayne had never obtained the proper business licenses required for managing rental properties in our city. He'd inherited the properties but hadn't done any of the legal paperwork required to operate as a legitimate landlord. This wasn't just incompetence, it was potentially illegal. From my beachside villa in Paradise, I began to see a path forward that had nothing to do with personal revenge, and everything to do with ensuring that Wayne faced the natural consequences of his poor choices and illegal behavior. Sitting on my balcony overlooking the Indian Ocean, I crafted what would become the most satisfying letter I'd ever written. But before sending that letter, I had work to do. Using the resort's excellent internet connection, I compiled a comprehensive dossier of Wayne's failures as a property manager and submitted anonymous reports to every relevant authority. The city's code enforcement department received detailed reports about each property Wayne owned, complete with tenant testimonials, photographs of violations, and documentation of his failure to respond to previous warnings. I made sure each report was meticulously documented and impossible to ignore. The IRS received information about Wayne's unreported rental income and his failure to properly file taxes as a business owner. His social media posts showing expensive purchases and luxury vacations combined with his rental income records painted a clear picture of someone who wasn't properly reporting his earnings. Local housing authorities received complaints about habitability issues, illegal rent increases, and Wayne's failure to maintain safe living conditions for his tenants. I included contact information for tenants who were willing to speak with investigators about their experiences. The most powerful weapon in my arsenal was a local investigative journalist named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in exposing slumlords and housing violations. I reached out to her with a complete package of information about Wayne's properties, his tenants' experiences, and evidence of his neglect and possible illegal activities. Rebecca was immediately interested in the story. A young man inheriting rental properties and then neglecting them while living lavishly was exactly the kind of housing injustice story that her readers loved. She had the resources and connections to investigate Wayne's activities thoroughly and expose them publicly. What made my plan so perfect was its complete legitimacy. I wasn't fabricating evidence or making false accusations. I was simply ensuring that Wayne's actual misconduct and incompetence received the attention it deserved from authorities who should have been monitoring him all along. While I orchestrated Wayne's downfall from paradise, Marcus and I were genuinely reconnecting and healing our relationship. The distance from family drama and the beauty of our surroundings helped us remember why we'd fallen in love. Marcus was proud of my strategic thinking and impressed by my patience in letting Wayne destroy himself through his own actions. Our days in the Maldives were filled with snorkeling sunset dinners, couples massages, and long conversations about our future together. For the first time since the wedding disaster, we were talking about having children, buying a house, and building a life based on our own values rather than my family's dysfunction. From paradise, I sent Wayne one carefully crafted letter. It was timed to arrive at his home just as the official investigations I'd triggered were beginning, creating maximum psychological impact. The letter was simple, direct, and perfectly calculated to let him know that his downfall wasn't an accident. The letter read, "Wayne, I hope you've enjoyed managing Grandma Esther's properties. I've been doing some research from my vacation in the Maldives, and I think some people might be interested in how you've been handling things. You always said I was irresponsible with money, but it looks like you're the one who doesn't understand the value of what you stole. Enjoy the attention you're about to receive. Love, your sister Charlotte." I included several photos of Marcus and me enjoying luxury resort amenities, snorkeling in crystal clear water, and dining at restaurants that cost more per meal than Wayne's tenants were paying in monthly rent. The contrast between our earned vacation and his inheritance-funded lifestyle was intentional and pointed. The timing was perfect. My letter would arrive just as city inspectors, IRS investigators, and journalists were beginning to scrutinize Wayne's activities. He would know immediately that I had orchestrated his exposure, but there would be nothing he could do to stop the consequences of his own actions from unfolding. Returning home from the Maldives to find my revenge plan working perfectly was more satisfying than any tropical sunset. Wayne was facing multiple investigations and serious legal troubles that threatened to cost him everything he'd stolen from me and more. The local newspaper had run a front-page story titled "Local Landlord Faces Multiple Violations," featuring Wayne's properties prominently with photos of the worst maintenance problems. The article quoted several tenants about living conditions and described Wayne as an example of irresponsible property management that city officials were cracking down on. City inspectors had found numerous code violations requiring immediate expensive repairs, broken heating systems, faulty electrical work, roof leaks, and structural problems that Wayne had ignored for months were now legally required to be fixed within 30 days or face daily fines that would quickly become financially devastating. The IRS investigation was moving forward based on Wayne's failure to properly report rental income and his questionable business expense claims. His social media posts showing expensive purchases and vacations had provided a perfect paper trail of income that didn't match his tax filings. The penalties and back taxes he was facing would cost him tens of thousands of dollars. Most importantly for Wayne's tenants, they had organized and were pursuing legal action for uninhabitable living conditions and illegal rent increases. Several tenants were withholding rent until repairs were completed, creating immediate cash flow problems for someone who had been depending on rental income to maintain his expensive lifestyle. The beautiful irony was that Wayne's mismanagement had depleted most of Grandma Esther's carefully saved cash reserves. The expensive lifestyle he and Sandra had maintained while neglecting property maintenance had left him cash poor and facing enormous repair bills, legal fees, and tax penalties all at once. My parents were horrified by the negative publicity and furious with Wayne for lying about his competence as a property manager. The family construction business was suffering by association with Wayne's property management scandal, and customers were asking questions about the family's integrity and professionalism. Gerald finally broke his silence and called me not to apologise, but to ask if I had anything to do with Wayne's problems. I told him honestly that I had simply ensured that the right authorities knew about Wayne's actual behaviour and business practices. If Wayne hadn't been violating codes and ignoring his responsibilities, there wouldn't have been anything for them to investigate. Marlene was less diplomatic in her phone call. She accused me of destroying the family and trying to hurt Wayne out of jealousy and spite. I reminded her that she had helped Wayne manipulate our dying grandmother and steal my inheritance, so her opinion about my character wasn't particularly valuable to me anymore. Wayne himself called me in complete desperation after realizing that his legal and financial problems weren't coincidental. He was crying, actually crying, as he begged me to help him figure out how to deal with the investigations and lawsuits. He claimed he hadn't known what he was doing and that he was sorry for how everything had happened. I listened to Wayne's sobbing apology with the same calm detachment I'd felt while researching his failures from my resort balcony in the Maldives. When he finished his emotional breakdown, I explained that this was exactly the point. He had manipulated our grandmother into giving him something he wasn't prepared to handle responsibly. Sandra, faced with mounting legal and financial problems while pregnant with their first child, was no longer supportive of Wayne's confidence and entitlement. She'd started asking hard questions about why he hadn't been properly maintaining the properties and managing the business responsibly. Their marriage was becoming strained under the pressure of consequences he'd created through his own choices. I didn't gloat or take pleasure in Wayne's tears. Instead, I calmly explained that actions have consequences and that manipulating a dying grandmother to steal from family wasn't something that should go without accountability. I mentioned that if he had managed the properties responsibly and treated me with basic respect, none of this would have been necessary. The resolution wasn't about me getting my inheritance back. Most of that money was gone spent on Wayne and Sandra's luxurious lifestyle, or would be consumed by the legal fees and repair costs Wayne now faced. But justice wasn't about recovering money. It was about Wayne facing the natural consequences of his incompetence and cruelty. My relationship with Marcus emerged from this experience stronger than ever. Our time in the Maldives and my strategic handling of the family crisis had proven that we could face challenges together as a team. Marcus admired how I'd chosen justice over revenge, letting Wayne destroy himself rather than stooping to his level of manipulation and deceit. Several months later, my parents reached out cautiously, attempting to rebuild some kind of relationship with me. They claimed they hadn't realized Wayne would mismanage everything so badly and that they were sorry for their role in the inheritance betrayal. I was polite, but maintained clear boundaries, explaining that trust once broken so completely would take years of consistent, respectful behavior to rebuild. Charlotte's final reflection on this experience focused on the deeper lessons about family integrity and justice. The inheritance had never really been about money. It was about being valued and respected by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. Wayne's theft of the inheritance had ultimately revealed his true character and destroyed his relationships with everyone who mattered. I found peace in knowing that I had handled the situation with integrity and intelligence. I hadn't become bitter or vindictive like Wayne. I hadn't manipulated or deceived anyone. I had simply ensured that his actual behaviour and illegal activities faced appropriate scrutiny from the proper authorities. The difference between revenge and justice became clear through this experience. Revenge would have been me trying to hurt Wayne out of spite or anger. Justice was ensuring that Wayne's poor choices and illegal behaviour faced natural consequences that would protect other people from his incompetence and irresponsibility. Marcus and I used our experience to build a stronger foundation for our marriage. We learned to recognise toxic family dynamics and set boundaries that protected our relationship from outside manipulation. We also learned that what you build together through hard work and mutual respect is more valuable than anything that can be inherited or stolen. Today, Marcus and I own a small rental property that we purchased through our own savings and responsible financial planning. We maintain it properly, treat our tenants with respect, and manage it as a legitimate business rather than a personal piggy bank. We learned that success earned through your own efforts feels infinitely better than wealth inherited or stolen from others. My final message is about not letting family betrayal destroy your own integrity and values. I could have become bitter and vindictive, but instead I chose to focus on building a better life with people who genuinely care about me. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and letting toxic people face the consequences of their own actions. Have you ever had to deal with family members who felt entitled to things that didn't belong to them? How do you think you would have handled Wayne's manipulation and theft? Let me know in the comments below, because I love hearing your stories and perspectives on family drama and justice. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayal justice and finding your way through toxic relationships. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for all the support you show in the comments. I hope my experience helps someone else who might be dealing with similar family dynamics. Remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and love, and anyone who doesn't understand that isn't worth your time or energy. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter in your lives.